South Carolina gets through the regional unscathed, 16-2. They outscored their opponents, and they move on. It'll be UCLA coming to town as the number 9 seed this weekend at Beckham Field. And John Whittle covered it all, as he always does this weekend from the Big Spur, and has joined us on a Monday morning like he usually does. And it looks, Mike, like he's brought the birds back, which is just
Thank
phenomenal.
goodness.
Yeah.
This segment, I think, lacks a little without the birds in the background. No offense, John. I just think
Understood.
Once you spoiled us with the natural habitat, to then take it away, I just think is cruel to the audience. So I'm glad it's back.
Yeah, and they're pretty loud today too. It sounds like
they're fired up.
Well, they were at the game.
I know you
yesterday.
are too.
Yeah,
yeah. Well, absolutely.
They saw what happened down the street at Beckham Field. They're just they're singing whatever they're singing with the Super Regionals around the corner. John, it was Carolina got off to some slow starts offensively this weekend, but they did what they do. They pitched and they played defense, allowed their offense to come around, and got through a scrappy North Florida team. Want to make sure we give them a lot of credit. The Ospreys, nice story. Certainly a touching moment when Allison Benning came out of the game yesterday. It looks like her career, will be over, at least in college softball. Who knows what's happening next? She's had an outstanding one of those, but couldn't get through the 8-seeded Gamecocks at Beckham Field.
Yeah, Allison Benning pitched phenomenal all weekend. You could tell she was getting a little bit worn down in the game on Saturday. She started losing the zone a little bit and leaving some pitches where they shouldn't be, which was not the case for those first 5 innings. But it was it was probably the most hot and humid day in Columbia so far this year. It's been kind of mild around here, knock on wood, that's been the case. But Saturday was hot and humid, and South Carolina outlasted her and finally broke through. And then Sunday, she threw, I think, 315 pitches over the course of the weekend. But give South Carolina credit. I mean, they battled her all day long, both days, and just ended up being a little bit better. And shout out to Sam Gress and Jory Hurd, who pitched as well as they did. I mean, North Florida had some chances a couple of times in both games, especially in that game on Sunday. But they pitched out of trouble at every turn. Some nice defensive plays were made at times, but the pitchers were able to get the ground balls they needed when they needed them.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You're right. Sam Gress she's a pleasure to watch play the game. This entire pitching staff certainly is. Sam, 8 2/3 innings this weekend, 9 hits, no runs. Should have 5 strikeouts and 5 walks. One of those was intentional, as a matter of fact, to Allison Benning. And then, John, it felt to. I was curious. I thought it would be good. And it was. I was curious what Mike mentioned just a little bit ago, the Sarge and how loud it used to be, and it was quaint and it kind of packed in there. I was excited to see what it would look like this weekend with all these folks excited about this program. Kind of a similar feel. You could see a lot of what used to be just, a couple hundred yards to the side of Beckham Field. It was a great environment, and Ashley has mentioned multiple times, in their trips around the SEC and things like that, they kind of take notes of what they want to do and how they want to improve the ballpark and things and whatever the case is. But this was as good of an atmosphere, I think, that ballpark has had since it's been renovated, and probably long before that as well.
Well, I can't really speak to it. I think I've said this before, but I had never been to a softball game before this year.
Right.
Even like I was.
You're not alone in that. You're not alone in that.
I was a student at South Carolina for 4.5 years and never made it to a game. I'd never covered a game before this season, so it was my first trip out there. So I can't speak to whether this year was a whole lot different than another. But I think I'm sliding out on a pretty safe limb and agreeing with you that this has to be as excited as folks have ever been over South Carolina football or softball in the last couple of decades. There have been a couple of one-off seasons here and there, that have been really good, but just kind of the momentum that they have and the energy that Ashley has brought in. And, I heard y'all talking earlier about, folks are just kind of able to connect with the players. And I think that that's totally true. That's something that was so special about some of those College World Series teams for baseball is, they were obviously so super talented, but they had some real personalities out there as well. And, I think when those two things marry together so well, it creates such a more tangible excitement among the fan base. And you can certainly feel that at Beckham Field over the weekend.
I mean, 100%. Gosh, you mentioned the World Series teams, and I would go back even, further than that with Carolina baseball. But the point is exactly the same. And it's also, we were talking to Ashley last week, or it might not have been last week, but at some point in time, last couple of times she was on, and I mentioned to her, she's kind of always like right here, but you can, after games, you see the joy that she has when they win and stuff like that. But the team really kind of takes on her personality. You can see how connected they are to her. I think the first sign of that was when she got the job, that pretty much her entire team at Charlotte was like, hey, if you got some room, we'd like to come still play with you. She walked out the door tomorrow to go to another school. She'd have an entire team of Gamecocks going, hey, where are you headed? I mean, we love it here, but where are you going? They really have bonded with her and bonded with this staff. It's not easy, John, to do that, but I think her personality, her steady Eddie during games has allowed them to do a lot of the things they've done this year. And I would say it this way to kind of summarize, how many games have they been down early or things just haven't been clicking and it feels a little whatever, but then they just kind of turn it on and they win the game and the ball game's over. If you don't get too high or don't get too low, those things are able to happen. And that has largely happened since day one of this season when they played Virginia.
Yeah, for sure. And Ashley mentioned that in her press conference the other day was, it felt like early in the season when we just had to find a way at the end. And, that's what they did a lot early on. And you mentioned it going back to even the first two games against Virginia, it's happened. So, they've been in some tight spots here and there, but that's what pitching and defense will do for you. Pretty much every game is going to be close, and that's what this team thrives on most, with a couple of big boppers in there too, or one big bopper and a couple of really good hitters in there too in that lineup. But they've thrived this year on pitching and defense. I haven't looked a lick into UCLA, if that's what you were going to want to talk about eventually, but yeah. It sounds like from your comments earlier, UCLA is built a little bit differently than South Carolina. But South Carolina is a pitching and defense team, and figure out a way to win in the end, and that's what they've done.
UCLA is built like a powerhouse. I obviously, I mean, they're 5-1 against the SEC this year. They did lose to LSU. I don't know, how you judge playing the Big Ten schedule versus playing the SEC schedule. I would tend to say it's not very comparable, obviously, as referenced by how many host teams, how many teams are actually in the tournament. But they hit 346 as a team, John. They got two kids that are well over 400. They've hit 93 home runs as a group. They fielded at a 979 clip, and they've got a team ERA of 2.38. And they got three starters that have started, I don't know how many games that is. 56 games. They're 52-10. Three starters have started 56 games. So it's kind of set up like a baseball rotation with them. And so this is going to be as difficult a task as anybody's got in college softball this weekend.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even if you're the number 9 national seed, you're pretty damn good. I know South Carolina beat out UCLA for that last spot, but they've won 51, 52 games on the season. I mean, they're used to winning. like that's such a big deal. I mean, you get so used to winning, you're figuring out ways to win too, whether you're bashing teams over the skull on a daily basis, or winning the tight ones. You're winning them somehow. So UCLA's obviously got some great offensive numbers, and South Carolina's got some really good pitching numbers, and a duo and Gress and Hurd that have just been phenomenal working off of each other. And Neely Lamb is in there too as well. So I feel good if I'm Ashley Chastain about the way my team is going, regardless of what's happening with the other.
Listen to this, Mike, John. Listen to this. Megan Grant and Jordan Woolery this year. Grant is hitting 377. Woolery's hitting 423. So you combine that, that's a 400 combined batting average if you want to make it simple. They also have a combined 47 home runs and 161 RBI. I don't care who you're playing against. That is dangerous.
That's how the game is. I was going to say that's how the game has improved a lot. There was a time where home runs in softball were like, watching a moon landing. It just didn't happen very often. But the game now has a lot of the power that the men's game showcases, which I think is great for fans.
Watching a moon landing.
You only get to see so many of those in your life, unless you're really connected.
I'm not.
Elon Musk as your friend or something.
I mean, I don't know that South Carolina's got 47 combined home runs in their starting lineup.
Oh, no, I don't think so. I you know what? It was mentioned a bunch this weekend on TV too. I mean, Carolina's hit 42 home runs as a team this year. But
there you go.
You wouldn't think about this because I'm so used to baseball. Like, what is a big ballpark in college baseball? Like generally in college baseball, if you're playing 400 to dead center and like 380, 385 in the gaps, like that's a pretty big ballpark. Hoover's a big ballpark, for instance. Most of the time, it's South Carolina is not really a big ballpark, but it's been mentioned over and over. South Carolina softball is a large ballpark compared to a lot of these, because it's like 225 in dead center field. I think 210 in the gaps, maybe 200 down the lines. I don't know what UCLA's is. I'd be curious how that plays and how much that's factored in. Regardless, they've hit 100 home runs. I mean, they're probably going to hit some balls that leave the yard this weekend in Columbia, no matter what. But I'd be curious as to how much that actually plays into the numbers too, with the lack of home runs for South Carolina and the amount that some of these other teams have. That's a project for you, John. Have at it.
Get on that, John.
We'll see on that one. We'll see. But Ashley's also pointed out that they have such a tall wall out there in the outfield too, that keeps a couple of balls inside the park as well. So long fence, high wall makes it more difficult, which is why what Ariana Rhodey's done pretty impressive.
She is impressive. 1:00 first pitch Friday. Softball, UCLA, ESPN2 tickets going on sale today.
Pardon me while I take a sip of water out of my Eastern Conference Finals Pacers cup.
Oh yeah,
You're good. A Pacers fan? Is that what that is?
Yeah, absolutely.
I didn't
absolutely know back to the days of Reggie Miller.
No geographical ties for you. You just like
not a single one.
You're just a diehard Rick Smits fan, is what that comes down.
It's the Dunking Dutchman. Yeah.
Yes.
The Davis brothers, Antonio and Dale.
Oh yeah, those were fun teams.
Mm-hmm.
Those were just couldn't get over the hump.
No, I can't go to one of these playoff games this coming week because
you can't.
I'm 0-11 in attending Pacers games. So I'm not going to jeopardize anything that they have going on against the Knicks. Lost one this year. I went to one playoff game in Atlanta one time. Pacers won that series in 5 games. I was at the loss. So we'll just stay away.
Oh, so maybe you're the problem for Carolina baseball.
Well, I've been to Omaha a few times as well. I'm not sure if that's quite true or not, but maybe so. Who knows?
Nah, I don't think it is. Thank you, Ben. Ben said it's 190 down the lines out in at UCLA, 210 to center field. So 10 feet, 15 feet matters. That's for sure. All right, Gamecocks, they've got Florida in the first round of the tournament this weekend. coming off of a series loss against LSU, 6-5. The walk-off on Thursday, and then they fell Friday. And I think earlier I said Friday. I don't know. Didn't mean it that way, but they lost 8-1. They lost 7-3. John, not a shocker that the number one team comes to town and takes the series from you. It was a neat moment, certainly on Thursday night, to see them win a ball game and be able to celebrate the way that they did, coming back in the ninth inning like that. But then more of the same on Friday and Saturday that we've seen largely throughout the year.
Yeah. Thursday was a lot of fun. It's their first win of the season after trailing after 8 innings. I think it was 22 in a row no, excuse me, 17 that they had lost when trailing after 8 innings. So it was cool to see that comeback win from them. And they battled back a couple of times. You remember they fell behind in the first inning of that game on Thursday, and they tied it up at 3 and in the 6th, and then almost immediately LSU came back and scored a couple more runs, and South Carolina got 1 in the 8th and left a guy on base, and then come back with 2 in the 9th, and Scobie hit the homer, and Whittle hit the triple, which I had no idea what that ball was going to do off the bat. Like, it looked like it was going to be towards the line, but it looked like it was going to be, to me, like 15, 20 feet short of reaching the wall. And then it got out to the corner and somehow stayed fair and hit kind of near the top of the wall. And, all of a sudden, Jace Whittle, who, looked like he was ball watching for a little while, he still had enough time to get all the way around to third base. That ball bounced so far off the wall. So, I felt I was so happy for the players that they had a chance to enjoy that moment. And some guys made some big plays in that game. It's certainly not lost that LSU didn't exactly come out of the gates like gangbusters in the series. But South Carolina did a lot of winning things in that game, and it was nice to see them win and have that moment. And like you said, Friday wasn't all that competitive. Saturday was competitive for a lot of the day, but just couldn't figure out a way to really crack a couple of those pitchers that the Tigers have.
Yeah, it's it almost unfortunately seems like okay, we just got to get through the SEC tournament and then this thing's over, which is sad. And they've got Florida, and Florida came in a couple of weeks ago and embarrassed them. As far as the players specifically go, let's focus on Whittle for a second, John, because he was a big time JUCO guy who came in. He's tied with Henry Kazmar for the lead in SEC play this year, hitting 333 in the conference. He's hit 3 balls out of the yard. I remember, Mike, I know you remember very, very well, and I'm not necessarily comparing apples to apples here in any way, shape, or form. But when it comes to JUCO guys, if you can get a good JUCO guy, it's a great way to be able to just continue to. Remember what Coach Tanner used to say, we don't rebuild, we reload at South Carolina? That was kind of his phrase. And I remember in 2001, there was a guy who had just transferred in from the great state of California. His name was Jerome Peters. And Mike, as you well know, he hit under $150 his junior year, the big, powerful guy from San Jacinto. And then the next year he hit 377 with 29 home runs and 77 RBI. He was largely maybe the best hitter in college baseball for the entire year. I'm not saying that next year we're going to see Jace Whittle hit 30 home runs. That's not what I'm saying at all. But I do say this. We know that there's going to be turnover coming with this roster one way or another. And you want to be able to build your program around something. I can't envision a scenario where Jace Whittle is at one of those key pieces.
Yeah, I mean, you may be right. For him to kind of take that next step, he's got to be better against left-handed pitching. He was pretty terrible in the fall against left-handed pitching. He wasn't very good overall, but certainly against lefties. And then he hasn't gotten a ton of opportunities this season. I got some numbers before this past series weekend that broke it down a little bit, and he was 1 of 16 against left-handed hitters over the course of the year. So that's not a number that's going to fly to be an everyday player. He he had the ground ball and reached on an error against a left-handed pitcher in the one game this past week, and it hadn't worked for him there. But I agree with you. He's near the top of the team in terms of batting average in SEC play. He's right there with Henry Kasmer at 333. He's got 3 homers. He's an older guy who you have to think that if he's back, they've got to find a place for him in the lineup, and they've got to figure out a way to get him better, hitting against lefties.
And that's kind of my point, Mike. Like when you were the voice of the Gamecocks, your voice got worn out calling all those balls that left the yard with your own. It's a shame the guy couldn't just get one more out of the yard to get to 30. But that's like when you're talking about the future of your program. The transfer portal is the wild, wild west. Everybody is in the transfer portal, and everybody's going to be looking for the elite players in it. I'm a big believer in JUCO still to this day. I think it took a little bit of – John, you cover it better than anybody as far as where these guys come from and stuff. But I do think that, we're maybe kind of coming back a little bit with recruiting the junior colleges. I think the transfer portal kind of took some of the polish off of that for a few years. But back in the day, South Carolina base, they plugged and played with JUCOs every year. We could do a laundry list. Mike, you could sit here for the next hour and 15 minutes and give us a laundry list of guys that were JUCO dudes that didn't make you have to go to the high school ranks and then hope in 3 years that guy pans out. You could still do that, and then you just bring in a guy in junior college, you let them figure it out. And I think that that's going to be very key for the Gamecocks, right? Isn't that fair?
Yes. Ordinarily, those JUCOs, those were Jim Tolman guys.
Absolutely.
And what happened was Jim Tolman had a formula where obviously everybody wants to get the top, you want to get the Drew Myers of the world, but those are not always in your backyard and they're not always attainable. So he was getting the best Florida and California JUCOs. Every year I'd be like, where are you going, Storm? I got to go to a showcase in San Francisco or some town I've never heard of in California. And he'd always go to the one in Florida, and he would always find players that at the time no other SEC school was looking at. The SEC schools kind of frowned upon JUCOs, quite honestly. And then all of a sudden, other programs were watching the success of Carolina with those JUCOs, where very often half the starting lineup would be JUCO. Half the starting pitchers would be JUCO. A closer like a Blackwell would be JUCO. And other SEC coaches are like, maybe we ought to be contending for these players too. So all of a sudden, Storm wasn't alone anymore. He had company. To his left and to his right were assistant coaches from other SEC programs, and they started getting JUCOs. Arkansas started a pipeline of California kids. So the secret sauce was out, so to speak. And then Chad came in, and obviously another elite recruiter. But Chad was more high school oriented, less JUCO. And then now, to your point, Jamie, it really, the portal has replaced a lot of those slots that JUCOs would grab. It's not saying JUCOs aren't still out. There's so many really good junior colleges, particularly in those states, that produced a lot of elite talent that'll still be good enough to play in the SEC. But for some coaches, the dangling carrot of a guy who's already done it at the Division I level is just a little, it's too much to pass up over a JUCO. So I don't know what the sweet spot is anymore. I think you're always going to have JUCO in play, but the portal is going to take some of those spots away that ordinarily you would have reserved for JUCOs. The other X factor is now, of course, the roster limits. We're in a whole new era of college baseball where you can offer all these kids full scholarships and then some. So, that was another thing. Jim used to sit there and he'd show me his notes on the 11.7 and how he would divvy that up. And I was like, how do you do this? I'm getting a headache just trying to figure it all out. He's like, that's what we got to do. You don't have to do that anymore.
No.
Now that can be looked at as a good or a bad thing from a Carolina standpoint, because there are some programs that can stockpile talent the way Georgia does in football. So I'm very curious to see how that's going to look in the future now. And not everybody's going to sign the whole. In fact, very few will sign that full number of scholarships. Most programs cannot afford that. But even still, it's going to be a hell of a lot more at 11.7.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I remember people used to think guys like Smoke got full scholarships. I'm like,
Nobody did.
No, they didn't.
Drew Meyer turned down $600,000 from Tommy Lasorda in his living room and then got a half scholarship.
Yeah, then had to pay to go to school.
It's just like insane. And if you said you had a problem with it, like a Ron Polk did, he was the only guy that would go public with it and did so on my show several times. Well, then you'd get the mob of, oh, well, you're anti-Title IX. So nobody wanted to mess with it. They all knew it was wrong, but they didn't want to say it publicly.
Mm-hmm. John, with the way that the year has gone for South Carolina, where does this start? What do you think happens first here? Where does this? The portal opens June 2nd. So where do you think this whole thing begins?
Well, I think it begins by figuring out, who's coming back. At the same time, you really need everything. So, you're going to go out and try to recruit everything. And, that doesn't mean like South Carolina needs to start. That Whittle's saying, South Carolina needs a starting third baseman, so KJ Scobie's leaving. No, that's not what I'm saying. Like, you go out and get the best players that you can get because you need a hell of a lot of good players. And as we know from past, especially some of those like those 2002 to 2004 Omaha teams, you get shortstops, you can put them anywhere and let them go play. So you've got to go out there and find some of the best players that you can, regardless of position. You gotta find a whole bunch of pitchers that you think that can play and compete at this level. It's just you just got to go find a bunch of guys, whether they're from the JUCO or the portal. But there's probably going to be 25 new faces on the roster next year, and they've gotten a start with 6 high school guys, and I don't have my JUCO list updated right now, but they've probably got about 8 JUCO guys committed. So they're starting to get some numbers, but they're probably only halfway there.
Mm-hmm. The pitching staff has been a debacle, to be, I think, polite on this thing here. I'm certainly not gonna throw or ask for specific names or anything like that. But John, I think that there are guys on this, like, there's a lot of ways we can go this. We've only got like 4 or 5 minutes left with you. But there's this like big misconception out there that they just need to go get a bunch of guys that throw really hard. I think people are forgetting there's a lot of guys on this team that actually do throw really hard. But that's not what necessarily wins you games either. Just generally speaking here, the nucleus of guys that have the opportunity to return to South Carolina, I'm talking about guys with eligibility. Okay, if nothing happened and all the guys with eligibility returned to the Gamecocks, and you start with that group right there specifically, we're going to begin to really truly develop these guys and get them in the direction they need to go. How would that start the conversation of revamping this pitching staff? In other words, what I'm asking you is, do they have enough here that could return that you feel like could put them in a much better spot next year before ever having to add another arm or two?
I mean, yeah, I think from a talent standpoint, sure. They have like those guys there on the pitching side just haven't been developed at all. Right. From last year to this year over the course of the year, there's nobody who can convince me that Brandon Stone, who was ranked as the number 1 JUCO player in the country, not even pitcher, number 1 JUCO player in the country. You're talking about going out and getting JUCOs and having those guys be good. Like, when you get the number 1 JUCO player in the country, you expect that guy to be really good, right? Like, there's nobody who can convince me that he should have a ERA over 6 overall and almost 9 almost 8 in SEC play. I just can't be convinced of that. So, it's a really difficult question for me to answer and to put into perspective, like what needs to happen with South Carolina's pitching staff. Like, if you want to talk about velocity and hard throwers, Jake McCoy's been up to 97, several times, and his numbers are no better this year than they were last year. You've got to develop guys and give them the tools to be successful. And there's really only one guy from last year's team whose numbers are better than they were last year, and that's Parker Marlott. And they haven't really even thrown Marlott a whole heck of a lot. He's been kind of the third guy out of the bullpen in a lot of instances. I mean, they've thrown him here and there, but I don't know. It's hard for me to answer, and just saying that South Carolina's pitchers don't throw hard enough over and over again doesn't make it true. They've got. I mean, Brendan Sweeney was throwing 97. Ryder Guarino or Cooper Parks the other day was up to 96. Ryder Guarino was 95 throughout the fall. Zach Russell's 95 throughout the fall. Caleb Jones 94, 95. Tyler Pitzer was 94, 95 last year. Aiden Palmer's got a decent fastball as a left-hander. I don't mean disrespect to Jarvis Evans or Matthew Becker, but, folks are acting like those are the only two guys. And, Ashton Crowther are the only three pitchers on the staff. Like most of the rest of the guys, throw at least competitive fastballs. And, it just, I don't really understand the fact that folks are saying that South Carolina just has no arm strength. And yeah, there aren't some 98, 99, 100 mile an hour guys like there are a few of out there, and most of them residing on the best teams. But, there was a lot of talk over the weekend about Chase Shores, LSU's pitcher, who was coming out and throwing 99 or 100 miles an hour. Well, his ERA is about, let's see, I've got right here is 6.25 in SEC play, and then overall it's over 5. So those guys still give up runs. Well, their best pitcher, their best reliever, Zach Cowan, who South Carolina got to the other night, but he was one of the top pitchers in the SEC, top 5 pitcher in the SEC coming into the weekend in terms of ERA. He's a 92 mile an hour fastball guy. So there's a whole lot of ways to win and be successful from a pitching standpoint. I agree that it'd be nice for South Carolina to go out and get a couple of guys who are, pumping 97 out of the bullpen on a consistent basis. You also got to do a better job of developing what you have, whether they throw 97 or whether they throw 92. So, there's a lot of work to be done with the pitching staff. I think that the talent is so much better than what it's shown. 6.31 ERA right now on the year for this staff. We've got records going back to 1962 only. And it's the worst on record. The next closest was 6.20 back in 1997. And a couple years later, they changed how the bats work because the game was getting too offensive. So this isn't the worst pitching staff in the history of South Carolina baseball. It's far from it. I know Eli Jerzenbeck was a big loss, but I mean, he didn't pitch last year either, and this pitching staff was a lot better. There haven't been a slew of injuries on that staff that you would point to make it worse than what it really is. Guys just haven't pitched well, and I don't think that's all on the talent, and I don't think that's all on the players. I think they haven't been put in place to be successful.